So I guess the message that I'm going to try and communicate, I guess that I have learned as a leader over my time in academic medicine, really gets around to never let a good crisis go unused. If you want to make change, if you want to have the system change to do what you think is right, there is no better time to do that than in the middle of a crisis if you can keep your head. And what I'm going to try and do is give you some examples of some things that are going on in American healthcare right now that have allowed medical education to make some tremendous changes that in the direction in terms of how students are taught, the things they're taught, that probably should have been done 30 years ago. So who has not heard or seen in the media that the American healthcare system is broken? And in fact, in many ways it is. We're now at a point where we spend 18% of our gross national product in the US on healthcare, which would be about twice as much as any other developed country in the world. Probably okay if in fact the outcomes are twice as good, but in fact if you look at where the US ranks compared to these other countries in things such as life expectancy, infant mortality, on a good day we're in the middle, and on most days we're towards the bottom half. So clearly something is wrong. And one would argue that the results that we get are actually predictable. In fact, they're exactly what you would get from the system that's been designed. So the system that we use for our healthcare in the US over the last 40 years focuses on taking care of people with advanced disease using high technology and a very physician and health center-centric approach to care. The result, again, is high expense because probably the solution to that is to focus on keeping people healthy rather than waiting until they get sick and then have to intervene with these very costly approaches to care. But at the same time, although one could argue that the healthcare system is broken, perhaps the better quote is the tale of two cities. It's the best of times and the worst of times. In that we also have tremendous opportunities in medicine now with advances in science, understanding the human genome, being able to identify and link diseases to specific genes, allowing for diagnosis or identification of risks for different diseases well before they happen, and understand the biology behind those diseases so that we can intervene before the need for those particular technologies. So in that setting, there's been and is tremendous chaos going on right now in the healthcare system as it shifts from so-called volume-based, that is, physicians and other providers getting paid to do things based on number of procedures and without really any particular respect to whether or not they provide value and what the quality of that activity is. So we are now shifting from what we call a volume to a value-based healthcare reimbursement system in a direction that, again, focuses on keeping people healthy. The challenge for the medical education system is that how do we adapt to those changes very rapidly? And one looks back at how physicians in particular have been educated over the last 30, 40 years. Certainly it's how I was educated. I spent most of my first 2 years of medical school in a classroom memorizing facts that were thrown at me by a lecturer. One of my instructors at the time in Los Angeles, where I went to medical school, candidly said, "We know that about 20% of the facts that we're having you learn aren't in fact true." Problem is, we don't know which 20% it is. So the advent of technology now has really created a tremendous opportunity for those who want to take advantage of it. Because when I went to medical school and when I started practicing medicine, the only information I had available to me when I went to see a patient was what I had up here. One couldn't go, every time one had a question, run to a textbook or run to the library to try and find an answer. So what we're now doing is in fact using technology, the smartphone and others. And what we have to do, and what we're doing, is changing our medical education curricula to accomplish that. And we wouldn't be doing it if we weren't taking advantage of the crisis. So no longer are students being asked to memorize things. They're really being asked to apply and figure out how to utilize the myriad of resources that are available to apply to a particular patient. They're being asked more specifically to listen, to learn how to listen to a patient. It's not just about using the technology, it's about that humanism part that had been lost in much of medical education. And the other aspect of the technology, which is cost-driven, but also quality and safety-driven, is that most physicians learned how to take care of patients and learned how to do procedures, unfortunately, by doing them for the first time on living patients. The see one, do one, teach one approach, unfortunately, permeated. There really was no other choice. The advent of simulation capabilities, computer simulation, has created an explosion in medical education. You're going to be seeing over at UNMC, probably within the next 2 years, the world-class simulation facility, which will utilize virtual simulation technology, virtual reality technology, to allow students, residents, practicing physicians to come back and practice over and over and over again in a computerized environment that allows them to master those skills before they ever come into contact with a patient. I don't know about you, but I would much rather have that medical student practice for the first time using computer software than on me. So again, the take-home point is this would not have been possible if we didn't likely have the crisis going on in healthcare. It's allowed us to think outside the box and to bring solutions and changes to the way that we approach medical education that probably would have been dismissed 10 or 15 years ago. So that's the message that I want to leave with you. When you're looking at opportunities, particularly in terms of new job opportunities, don't look for the stable environment. Don't look for the position where things are going smoothly. Look for where things are perhaps a little more chaotic, because that's where the opportunities are for you. That's where you're going to be able to establish your name and your reputation in your field, not by taking the safe road. So thank you, and I appreciate your attention.